Stats were 1 in 4 Canadians, which is crazy. 80% of the population aren't diagnosed. I see patients regularly that stop breathing over 100 times per hour. It's like their heart's running a marathon every single night when it should be resting. It's wild. I have sleep apnea myself. I don't mind telling people that. AHI is 27, 28 events per hour, so I'm almost a severe apneic. We have to get away from this kind of preconceived notion that it only affects heavyset people. I love what I do, and I feel that we're doing good as well because, we're identifying people that maybe have never gone to a sleep lab. You don't grow in the gym, you grow when you're sleeping at nighttime.
Andrew Holmes, how are you doing?
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you taking the time to come on the podcast. How have you been?
Doing well. Yeah, busy as always. I wear many hats. As a founder of a business and a family man as well with a couple of teenagers. I got to make sure I get my sleep as well at nighttime. As a self-proclaimed sleep expert, I can't look tired, right? If I look tired, they're like, he doesn't know what he's talking about. So my default answer is always, I slept very well last night, even if it's not always true.
How many kids do you have?
2 boys, 18 and 16, 2 teenagers. Yeah.
Okay. So getting into the teenagers can always be tricky.
They're well into them now. Yeah. It's good though. They're good lads. And I'm fortunate.
Okay. So before we jump into things, I just please share with our audience, what is it you do? Why does it matter so much now? And what perspective or opinion do you have that is atypical or unconventional?
So to give you an idea of my background, I started in sleep 20 plus years ago. I was a sleep technologist. So I am what they call an RPSGT, or a registered polysomnographic technologist. And that's really a mouthful for sleep technologists. So just like there's MRI techs, ultrasound techs, X-ray techs, there's also sleep technologists. So I did 13 years of straight overnights working in 3 sleep labs here across the city, the Civic, the General, and the Queensway. I went to school at the Michener Institute for Health Science. And after 13 years of straight overnights, I became the senior of the Cardiopulmonary Department at the Queensway Carleton Hospital, where I ran a full-service cardio department for the best part of a decade. And in that department, there was anything to do with the head, the heart, or the lungs we tested for. It's outpatient diagnostics. And the sleep lab was part of that. So I ran a 10-bed provincial sleep lab for the best part of a decade. So I went from overnights to full-time days, which was lovely. Obviously, working straight overnights, the irony is dripping from the sleep lab walls, right? You're trying to promote good sleep health, but everybody's doing overnight work. So, I was pretty successful in that space. I owe a lot to the hospitals and the provincial kind of healthcare system. But I started Sleep Efficiency in 2015, kind of as a consulting service to start off, where didn't really know which way it was going to know initially. I started doing a couple consulting engagements with airlines, transportation verticals. Sleep is such a critical piece of everybody's lives. We spend a third of our lives sleeping. So we evolved it today to be doing home-based sleep tests. So while I do a lot of public speaking and a lot of, engagements doing consulting work, Sleep Efficiency ultimately offers home-based sleep tests where we ship devices to the patient's home and they can test in the comfort of their own bed. So I've evolved it a lot more than what the designation was intended to be, as just a simple sleep technologist. And now I'm a consultant for CTV News as a sleep subject matter expert. I've done quite a bit over the last 20 years, and it's passion plus time is put me where I am here today. And
talk about why did you leave the hospital? Why didn't you just continue there? And why did you feel the need to start Sleep Efficiency?
Yeah, I guess complacency a little bit after working 20 years in the same system. I felt like, I could do a lot more than what my designation was intended to do. And I had the benefit of starting Sleep Efficiency in 2015 while I was still working at the hospital, and was able kind of to test out the model in a variety of different ways while still having the security of my full-time role. But, the hospital, while it does have its place and it is kind of the gold standard for a lot of different testing, wait times are astronomical across the province to get certain testing done. I believe that, in the hospital, it's very difficult to make change because there's a lot of stakeholders. And I kind of had an innovative itch that needed to be scratched, and Sleep Efficiency gave me that outlet. to be able to, push into spaces where things hadn't been done, working with different sports organizations, working in transportation, working in Department of National Defense and Ministry of Transportation. Everybody sleeps. It's you just got to kind of shift your demographic and the patients that you're kind of looking at, because whether it's everybody in this room here today, whether it's an infant, a baby, or it's a senior, nobody's exempt. Sleep is a biological process that has to happen every single night. And without, our sufficient hours, not just quality, but quantity as well, being 7 and 9, as per the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, you're not going to be really optimal for peak performance. Carrying a sleep debt can really have a big impact in many, many different ways.
Okay. You mentioned that like sleep efficiency, there's a lot more innovation in your practice. Do you believe the hospitals right now are lacking in that aspect? I don't
know whether they're lacking. There's constraints. There's budget, right? They have to balance budgets. There's never enough money to go around. So, being a small little scrappy independent company, 2 feet in a heartbeat, essentially, I was able to grow the business. I had a couple of physicians that started working and referring patients to us, to our sleep clinic. And I've grown that into close to 500 physicians now, whether that's family doctors. A lot of the major cardiology clinics here in town use our services, pre-op clinics. So yeah, the hospital, again, it's got a lot of constraints around it. One of the biggest ones being financial, but the hospitals seem to have a, don't change my world, don't do necessarily anything new or creative in certain spaces. Other areas, it's exploding with research, and we've got a brand new hospital that's going to be opening up, so that's super exciting. But I feel like I had a lot more to offer than what the role at the hospital could offer me, just because I'd been there 20 years. And I think change is also good. Like, I was senior at that hospital for 10 years at the cardio department, and I can become stale in the role. And I think it's important for new people to come in and shake things up and do things a little bit differently as well, for the benefit of the department as well. Yeah.
So, I mean, this sounds like such a simple question, but like, there's so much more nuance to it. But like, why do we sleep? Like, I know there's other animals out there, like, they sleep with half their brain, one half of their brain rests while the other half of their brain stays active and alert. Like, as human beings, why can't we do the same? Like, why is sleep so important?
Yeah, I think what you're referencing, I think it's called unihemispherical sleep, and it's defense mechanism, essentially. I think dolphins are one of the biggest ones that can do that, where they're keeping half of their brain alert while the other half sleeps. And again, it's to protect from their surroundings, right? Sleep is one of those things that has really only been recognized as, it's always been a non-negotiable, but only since the late 1950s or early 60s did we realize that there was a lot more going on when we slept than what was once thought. So rewind, to the late 50s, early 60s. Prior to that time, it was just this blackout period. We didn't know why. We didn't know the benefits. We just knew that it had to happen. You had to shut down, but we weren't really aware of the benefits. In the late 50s and early 60s, they did their first what they call EEG tests, which are known as electroencephalograms. So this is electrodes that are placed on the head. And while they were sleeping, these initial tests, they're able to see that the brain waves were changing throughout the course of the night. The amplitude of the brainwave was changing, the speed of the brainwave, the overall look, the aesthetic look of it, the frequency, all of these things were changing, and it was very formulaic in a pattern. And so the sleep cycle was essentially born out of that first few EEG tests. We go through 90-minute sleep cycles when we go to sleep at night, and each one of those stages of sleep afford different symptomatic improvements, and each one of them are critical to be optimal for peak performance. So the first stage, if you want to just kind of break it down quickly here, is just a stage 1. You're maybe 5 to 15 minutes. They aren't very creative with the names. It basically goes like stage 1, stage 2, slow wave sleep, and then REM. Or you can break it into 2 subcategories, REM sleep and non-REM, and then light non-REM and deep non-REM. So your first stage is just that transition period, not a lot of time spent there. We quickly move into stage 2 sleep, which takes maybe about 40 minutes of these 90-minute sleep cycles that take place. But our slow wave sleep, otherwise known as deep sleep, is really responsible for the body's physical restoration. This is when growth hormone is released, muscle and tissue regeneration take place. It's when our blood pressure drops and our heart rate drops. So that deep slow wave sleep is almost considered like nature's natural blood pressure medication. if you will. And that usually occupies the first portion of the night. We kind of do a physical repair. We spend more time in the slow wave sleep at the beginning of the night, and then more time in our REM sleep towards the earlier hours, even though you do touch on them every 90 minutes. Now, our REM sleep is more responsible for your body's cognitive restoration. I shouldn't say your body, your mind's cognitive restoration. It's your cognitive horsepower, if you will. It's responsible for emotional regulation, how you deal with stress and anxiety. It's responsible for memory consolidation. It's essentially hitting the save button. If you've been learning new things at school, your ability to encode them and then retrieve them later, that's all kind of recovered in your REM sleep as well. So these 90-minute cycles were discovered in the late 1950s and 60s, and now we're very hyper aware of how responsible each one of these different sleep stages are for our overall, health.
Memory consolidation. So let's say I'm cramming for a test, right? Night before, haven't studied. Would it be better to study a few hours and get a really good night's sleep, or, stay up all night, pull an all-nighter?
Yeah, good question. I think the first thing was, you probably shouldn't have put yourself in a position where you haven't done anything until the night before. I mean, you can pull the all-nighter and, maybe a nap. We can talk about naps in a little bit because those are a great tool to have in your toolbox. But ultimately, that memory consolidation takes place in your dream state. So, maybe getting sufficient hours will allow you to recall the information you can know. Each set of circumstances is going to be different, right? If it's like 9, 10 o'clock and you feel like you need to go through, you're going to do what you have to do to be successful. But a lot of the studies and data will show that, if you want to be optimal the next day for that memory recall, getting your 7 or 8 hours would probably be best for you.
You mentioned the deep sleep stage as well as REM. Which stage would you say is more imperative to productivity maximization?
So there's not one stage that's more important than the other. They both kind of serve those different purposes. So again, the deep slow wave sleep is that physical restoration, whereas your REM is the cognitive, and they're two equally important. So your slow wave sleep is like, you've ran a half marathon, or you've built a deck, or you're recovering from a knee operation. That's when your body's going to do a physical repair. I played pickleball last night, and
I've gotten into pickleball too recently.
Amazing. That's a whole
Great
other
sport.
podcast. Yeah. But like my body's physically sore today, but all of that physical healing from the explosive movements that my 48-year-old body didn't want to do was restored and recovered in that deep sleep. Okay. But, the cognitive piece is all kind of allocated to the REM. So there's not really one stage that's more important than the other. It's the full collective of those 90-minute cycles that allow you to be optimal for your physical health, your mental health, and your emotional.
Okay. So they all work together.
Yeah.
And so can you make up for sleep debt? Because I remember in high school, especially, like, we started so early in the morning. I played competitive hockey, and often I would get home from games, practices at midnight, and then have to wake up at 6, 7 in the morning the next day to catch my bus. And I used to think like, okay, whatever, I'll run off like less sleep during the week, and then I'll make up for it on the weekend. Is this a good strategy?
No. So sleep debt is like continuously getting less than recommended now. So again, breaking it down by age group as well. So let's say anybody over the age of 18, is considered an adult, should be getting somewhere between 7 and 9 hours. The teenage guys, 13 to let's say 17 should be somewhere between 8 to 10. And then lower than that, 9 to 11 and whatnot. So if you're consistently carrying a sleep debt, you can't fully pay it back. I mean, you'll try to do so on the weekends, and that's when maybe you'll knock out 8, 9, 10, 11 hours. But really, if you're shortchanging yourself throughout the course of the week, it's not, you can't kind of put it into a bank on the weekend and then draw from it like a savings account the following week, right? Really kind of putting that as a priority. And of course, like your hockey and things like that, life is to be lived, right? Everything we're talking about here is like just best practices. But of course, there's something to be said for the physical exercise that you did, maybe not doing it at midnight though, although I know ice time is probably only available then for certain age groups and things like that. So to answer your question, sleep debt has a variety of different consequences. And as it accumulates throughout the course of the week, you can pay back a portion of it, but it's not as though that should be a strategy where you draw from it on the weekends, or you pay back on the weekends, and then you run sleep deprived all week long.
How does the optimal sleep duration differ between men and women?
It's the recommended amount for both.
Okay.
I think the stats will say that, women tend to sleep about half an hour, 45 minutes more than men.
Why is that?
biological necessities, I suppose. I don't really have an answer for that, to be completely honest. And I don't know whether the research, I'm sure they ran tests. I think that it's a very small amount. It's like 30 to 45 minutes. And that's typical as well. But then again, maybe you've got high performing individuals on both sides where they're not getting the amount. Like it's very subjective, right? With certain people, if you look at, let's say, the ladies that maybe have got careers that are exceptionally demanding and males that have got exceptionally demanding, there's not one saying that one is going to end up sleeping more than others. I think if we were to look at it like a global stat, I think that I may be off, but I think it's only about 35 or 45 minutes where women tend to sleep a little bit longer.
Okay.
But again, subjective to the day-to-day routines and what their bodies or what their lifestyles demand.
Yeah. So you mentioned like
Excuse me.
teenagers, adolescents, they need a little more sleep than adults.
Mm-hmm.
So then why is it that most high schools are actually starting earlier than elementary schools?
Yeah, that's a problem with what starts to happen when you're in your teenage years, let's say 16, 17, 18, and I'm right in that space now with my two boys. There's a shift in what they call your sleep architecture. So your sleep architecture is essentially how much time you spend in each sleep stage. This is kind of a transition from those teenage years to adulthood. Now, when you're in those teenage years, you still really need the 9 to 11 or 8 to 10 hours worth of sleep, but you're essentially becoming an adult. Therefore, you're staying up later at night because there's a shift in your circadian rhythm, your sleep-wake cycles that force you to stay up later, but you still need that kind of 8 to 10 or 9 to 11 hours. So when you've got start times that are potentially starting at, 8 o'clock, 8:30, 9 o'clock, you've got teenagers that are maybe staying up till 12:31. And at that point, they're only maybe getting 7 or 8 hours because of the school start time. In the States, they've had many conversations about this, about actually pushing the start time for high schools to be 10 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
I think my boy, Jack, I think he starts at 9:15 now, is still their start time, but he's staying up till 12:30, 1 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I tell him what I do and here's what you should be doing, being a parent and giving them the best advice.
Yeah.
It's kind of frustrating because I know too much in this one particular space. And I try to push that on them, but like any teenager, it's just push back and you got to let them do what they do, right? Like at the end of the day, everybody gets through and comes out the other side. So, again, these are best practices that we're talking about today. And there's a term called sleep hygiene. Have you heard that term before?
Yep.
Which is essentially, best practices you can potentially do throughout the daytime that give you optimal sleep in the evening that in turn put you at peak performance the following day. So, if you were to do a search, there's probably 20 sleep hygiene tips that you could activate. And, doing this for 20 years, I tell people regularly, quality sleep doesn't happen when you go to bed at night. It's, what are you doing throughout the course of the daytime that's going to put you in the best position to sleep well that night? You need to protect it and do a series of different best practices throughout the daytime so that, your sleep onset latency, which is how long does it take you to fall asleep, the duration, everything is kind of optimized. And we can touch on a few of those if you.
So what's your bedtime routine?
My bedtime routine, I'm usually in bed by about 11:30.
Okay.
I'll say this, continuity is king. It's paramount to go to bed at the same time and get up at the same time as much as possible. And I would say more so the rise time. The notion there is you can't always impact what time you fall asleep, right? You can go to bed and you're obsessing over something you're stressed over, but you can always anchor your rise time. You can always get out of bed at the same time when your alarm goes off. And the whole concept there is that if we stay consistent with the rise time, the bedtime will naturally allocate itself to that specific hour as well. So my routine, usually I go to bed around 11:15, 11:30, and I usually get up around 7 or so. Usually that's my rise time. As I'm getting a little bit older now, I find I'm waking up a little bit more throughout the course of the night. Like I'm 48. I'm not shy to say my age.
They're good for 48.
Thanks. Must be. I'm well slept, right? I guess is the answer. But no, like again, remember I talked about as teenagers become adults, there's that shift in your sleep architecture. As we age, there's another shift in our sleep architecture where we actually spend less time in the deeper stages. You can't fight that. Less time in your slow wave sleep and more time in the lighter stages of sleep, which causes awakenings throughout the course of the night. So I don't think I'm there yet at 48. This would be more the senior years. So let's say the 55, 60, I don't want to be accused of ageism here, but let's say the 60 plus range, there is a shift that happens, this physiological process. So, the teenagers are spending so much time in their slow wave sleep. Mm-hmm. When my boys would come out of the bedroom, be like, wow, it looks like you grew overnight. Well, they did. right? They're literally growing when they're sleeping. You don't grow in the gym, you grow when you're sleeping at nighttime. But then as you transition into those older age group, less time in your slow wave sleep, which now it's causing more awakenings through the course of the night. I'd say now I feel like as of late, like probably in this last year or so, I'm waking up a little bit more like 6:30. But I also run a very demanding business. And sometimes, I'll wake up briefly and my mind starts going immediately on what I need to do today in order to tick all the boxes. And there's a lot of boxes that I tick in the daytime.
I think that's also too a testament to the hustle culture in Western civilization. We also talked about the school system. Say I were to appoint you as Prime Minister of Canada tomorrow.
Done. No, thank you.
What would you change about our society so that
Good Lord,
we can all optimize sleep?
It's a good question, actually. I don't think you need to be the prime minister to make these changes. I think it could start within the workplace culture itself. So I work with a lot of large organizations, and we have to kind of get away from this sleep deprivation badge of honor that you wear on your sleeve. It's almost looked upon as the person that pulled the all-nighter or the person that's exceptionally busy all the time, has no time for anything else. Their schedule's jam-packed and they're only getting 3-4 hours of sleep. That person's almost been promoted in the workplace, maybe not physically promoted, but like looked upon as the hustler, the guy or the girl that's just getting, they're outperforming everybody. And that's not true. Again, you allocate the amount of hours of sleep that you potentially should get every single night. That's 7-9 hours. You're going to be a lot more creative in many places. Your ability to perform at work. Not only that, but who you are as a person and who you are as an individual within the organization. If you're a boss or a leader, if you're completely shortchanged, your emotional regulation is going to be right down. You're going to be less reactive to the people that are coming in with problems. You're not going to be able to, listen to what they have to say, offer concise, constructive criticism or help them, support them in whatever they may need. And you're going to be short-tempered. I'm sure people in the room and, people that are listening, you're a lot more reactive when you're sleep deprived. So I would say, if I was to change anything, it can start within the workplace. People look at benefit programs where they offer massages and they offer, different benefits. Sleep should really be considered in these packages, because ultimately, if your team is well slept, it's just going to boost productivity. It's going to be a happier work environment, and everybody's going to be a lot more optimal, I would say. So yeah, I'd start maybe with the workplace culture and kind of really kind of protecting those hours and promote it, whether that's, different pieces of like, maybe emails that get sent out on different sleep tips, or hiring sleep consultants like myself. I'll go in and give a science of sleep presentation. I gave a presentation in the Ministry of Labor, I think it was a little while ago, and there was over 1,000 in the presentation right across Canada. And those are the type of conversations that will shine spotlights on how important sleep is. And I think, those changes can be made within the individual organizations themselves. And then, we'll roll out from there.
Okay. What are your thoughts on sunrise alarms? Like, my girlfriend actually just recently introduced me to one.
Sure. Yeah. I don't use one. Ultimately, I think maybe it's a lot better than a jarring, alarm clock that goes off on your phone that's aggressive. It's going to, cause stress and anxiety as soon as you kind of wake up. But yeah, I don't have a lot of experience with them, with the sunrise alarm clocks. I know it's a $1 billion industry right now, right? So there's all different types of, clocks and abilities to kind of, allow you to wake up nice and calm, soothing sounds at nighttime from the different calm apps that are out there. So yeah, I would say, we should look at the technology that's coming into the bedroom and just be careful that it's not something that's going to take away from your sleep. But like sunrise alarm clock on the other side, I don't think we typically have a lot of alarm clocks in the room these days. Most people just have their phone plugged in on the side of the bed.
Do you sleep with your phone in the room?
I do sleep with my phone in the room, yes. And I know that I probably shouldn't. But what I do specifically is I keep my phone out of reach. Now, the reason for that is, if it's beside your bed, you can grab it at 3:00 in the morning and all of a sudden there's an alert. There's Trump said something stupid again and now everybody's wired, or maybe an email that came in or something overnight. Like, we get a lot of referrals for different sleep services, and a lot of them come in overnight, as you can imagine, because they're not sleeping. So, making sure that your notifications are shut down. But I would say, the technology can potentially go too far in one direction. Once upon a time, we would say, get all the technology out of the bedroom, but now everything's coming back in. People are wearing trackers, devices. They're wearing Oura rings. And there's actually a new condition called orthosomnia. And I'll break this down. It's the inability to fall asleep and or stay asleep due to fear and anxiety of achieving optimal sleep induced by sleep tracking devices. So the whole notion there is that people are becoming so obsessed over their sleep score that it's actually doing worse things to them. Excuse me. So that's something that's been recognized by the American Academy of Sleep Medicine and worldwide, where people are becoming so obsessed over what the data is showing them that it's actually having the opposite effect, and it's impacting their day-to-day. So, what I would say as a takeaway there is look at, if you wake up in the morning and you look checking your tracking devices, I wouldn't really look at the morning trends. I would look at the weekly. Actually, let me rephrase that. I wouldn't look at the morning headlines. I would look at the weekly trends. So don't wake up and look at your app or your ring or whatever device you're wearing and determine how you're going to feel based on what a piece of technology tells you, right? Go intrinsic and just go about your day. Like if you were trying to lose weight, you wouldn't necessarily step on the scale every single morning to measure your weight. Maybe you do it on a weekly or monthly basis. So again, orthosomnia, you've gone too far in one direction. And with your apps and your trackers, I would say, look at what the weekly trends show or the monthly trends, as opposed to checking your sleep data every single morning when you wake up. Because a lot of them, there's a lot of wiggle room as well. A lot of them aren't as accurate as they make out to be, and they overestimate sleep in certain circumstances and underestimate it in others. So don't let your tech tell you how you should feel.
What's the correlation between sleep optimization and metabolism?
And metabolism? Well, I guess we could talk about leptin and ghrelin. Those are your hunger hormones. And those can be out of sync if you're constantly carrying a sleep debt. You shouldn't be eating too close to bedtime. I would say 2 hours is kind of the window there. But if you're constantly getting under 7 hours worth of sleep, your leptin and your ghrelin are your hunger hormones. Your ghrelin is when it's that hormone that allows you to feel full. Ghrelin is your hunger hormone where you actually makes you feel hungry, and leptin is the hormone that makes you feel full. So when you're constantly sleep deprived, these two hormones are completely out of balance, and therefore you're constantly going to the cupboard for an external fuel source. So I would say, sleep optimization 7 to 9 hours is going to allow those hormones and a variety of other systems to kind of manage themselves and regulate in a optimal performance. But if you're constantly getting sleep deprived, those two hormones will be out of sync, and again, causing problems with your metabolism and causing your ghrelin to be increased.
Yeah. You're not sharp. You're not making smart decisions. Yeah, that makes sense. So we briefly touched on it before, naps. And this was also during the time I was playing hockey, I used to think naps were kind of pointless because, I was sleep deprived, and maybe before a game or a practice, I would take a nap so I'd feel better, but I wasn't able to sleep long enough to experience and feel that full recovery. So you mentioned before when we were talking that naps are a really good tool to use. Talk a little bit more about that. What's your strategy? How long? What conditions do you try to mimic the night too when you go to bed?
Yeah, I actually did a CTV news segment last week. Yeah, last week on napping. And there's a lot more to it than what you would think. And the main takeaway I can say is duration matters. So 20 to 30 minute nap is what most people can kind of afford in a daytime if they're trying to increase energy levels, reduce stress, improve memory and focus. You don't want to go more so than the 20 to 30 minute window unless you can do a full 90 minutes.
Okay.
Excuse me, and I'll explain why. Those 20 to 30 minutes, you're going to be able to get into stages 1 and 2. We talked about sleep cycles previously. If you sleep longer than, let's say, 25 or 30 minutes, you're actually going to go into your slow wave sleep. And then if you can't complete that sleep cycle, which is 90 minutes, let's say you nap for an hour, you're going to be right in the middle of your slow wave sleep and right in the middle of your sleep cycle. So when you wake up, you're actually going to create something called sleep inertia. And sleep inertia is characterized by a drunkenness, a grogginess. I'm sure, people who are listening, you've laid down for an hour and you actually wake up feeling worse. Like, wow, why am I just feel so groggy? That's that sleep inertia that's crept in after the 20 to 30 minute mark. And it can take sometimes an hour or two to lift. It's like a fog that you've woken up in. So if you're able to go a full 90 minutes, being able to go through your light stages to your deep stages, and then closing into with a REM period, which affords that cognitive restoration, memory consolidation, emotional regulation, all those things, then you've actually been able to get to a full sleep cycle, which can afford all of the different symptomatic improvements. So I would say 20 to 30 minutes or 90. You don't want to get stuck in that middle at that hour mark, because that's where sleep inertia lives. It's like purgatory. It's a space where you don't want to be. So that would be my main takeaway. And I'll say this, if you're anybody that has problems sleeping or falling asleep, then the nap should be removed altogether.
Okay.
Don't nap at all throughout the daytime if you're lying awake for, longer than a half an hour. That sleep onset latency that we talked about, how long does it actually take you to fall asleep, should be somewhere between 5 to 15 minutes. So if you're somebody that's, taking an hour and a half, and then you're exhausted, so you're sleeping for a couple hours in the afternoon, you can't make up for it throughout the daytime. There's no substitute for that quality 7 to 9 hours. But if you can, again, great tool to have, 20 to 30 minutes or 90, just don't get stuck in that middle.
So Andrew, tell me, why is it that when I'm sleeping more than that 7 to 9 hours, I actually wake up feeling more tired? Like, it doesn't make sense to me.
It could be a variety of different reasons. You really shouldn't be sleeping more than 7 to 9 hours, period. If you're sleeping too long, it tells me maybe you're trying to recover from your sleep debt. There could be a sleep disorder at play where the quality of your sleep is not sufficient. If you're sleeping 10, 11 hours, hypersomnia, you could be, there could be something more at play there than what you actually are aware of. So one of the biggest things that we test for with our home-based sleep tests is sleep apnea. It's one of the most prevalent, most common sleep disorders. And what essentially is muscle tissues in the upper airway that cause partial or complete blocks. When your upper airway closes, it causes your oxygen levels to go down, your carbon goes up, your brain sends a signal to start breathing again. So people that are sometimes sleeping 10, 11, 12 hours, if you're really extended, it could be because the quality, your sleep is being interrupted constantly. Those who are severe apneics don't get to, or they don't stay in their deep stages, and they don't get to their REM stages as well. So they're sleeping for maybe 7 to 9 hours, but they're spending so much time in the lighter stages, and they're not really getting to the meat and the potatoes that allow you to wake up feeling refreshed.
Okay. I think of my father, like right when you say sleep apnea. He's been in for like several tests. He snores a lot too. Sleep quality is bad, wakes up really tired. How many people in Canada would you say have undiagnosed sleep apnea?
Right now, as of late, I think in the last year or two, they said the stats were 1 in 4 Canadians. So, which is crazy. So 25%, or we'll say, there's over 40 million now in Canada. So 10 million people. Now that's either have sleep apnea or at risk of developing it. And it doesn't mean they're all severe. There's sleep apnea is broken down into mild, moderate, and severe, and it's based on how many breathing events you have on an hourly basis. It's called an AHI, an apnea-hypopnea index. An apnea is that complete pause in breathing for 10 seconds or longer. A hypopnea is a reduction in airflow. So the upper airway is open, but is compromised to a certain extent. So 1 in 4 Canadians. And the other stat that accompanies that is something like 80% of the population aren't diagnosed. And that's due to lack of awareness and or the ability to test as well. So as I mentioned, sleep efficiency, we do home sleep testing. That's exactly what we test for, is to determine whether or not it's more than a snore, right? Your classic symptoms are chronic snoring, poor memory and concentration, excessive daytime sleepiness, waking up with a racing heart, witnessed apneas. All of these things can be markers that is something going on. And it's wild. I have sleep apnea myself. I don't mind telling people that. My AHI, so to break it down for you, anything between 5 to 15 events per hour, respiratory events in that AHI, which I explained, apnea-hypopnea index, deems you a mild apneic. Anything between 15 to 30 events per hour, you're considered a moderate apneic. And then anything over 30 events per hour, you're considered severe. I see patients regularly that stop breathing over 100 times per hour. And their upper airway closes. They have a massive apnea that lasts 60 seconds, 70 seconds, 90 seconds. They take a couple recovery breaths and it happens again. And their oxygen levels are plummeting. They're going into the 70s, the 60s. And that's putting a strain on their cardiovascular system. It's like their heart's running a marathon every single night when it should be resting and recovering.
Wow.
So the increased risk of cardiovascular disease goes up significantly if you have severe sleep apnea. But my AHI is 27, 28 events per hour. So I'm almost a severe apneic. And we have to get away from this kind of preconceived notion that it only affects heavyset people. I've had athletes that I've worked with that have had sleep apnea. I've had patients that are 120 pounds and they've been some of the worst I've ever seen. And I've had patients that have been obese with a BMI, elevated BMI, let's say 300 pounds, and they've had no problems. Sometimes it's to do with the tongue, the tonsils, or the uvula. So that can be the culprit. You know, I have an example of a guy that came in to get tested, and I see these regularly. And to look at him, he had like the body of a Men's Health magazine, like unbelievably ripped, like irritatingly so. You know, he was in his 40s, and he, you know, did Spartan races, CrossFit, all of these different things. But when I mentioned to him, sometimes it's the size of the tongue, the tonsils, the uvula. He stuck his tongue out, and his tongue was the thickness of a hockey puck. So when he fell asleep at night, his tongue was disproportionate to the size of the airway, and it was causing apneas to occur. So you have this person where he literally could have jumped off a Men's Health magazine, and he was a severe apneic as well. Oxygen levels below 80. So, you know, there's more awareness and there's more access to testing. People are becoming a little bit more aware of how significant it is. And yeah, that's what one of our main goals at Sleep Efficiency is you know, to spread awareness, to test as many people, because ultimately you're potentially prolonging the longevity of that particular patient. You know, the amount of patients I catch that are very severe on a weekly basis, we catch them where it's like, you may not have made it for the next year or two without having a significant cardiac event. So not to say that they're going to die, but, you know, it, as I mentioned, it can induce strokes, congestive heart failure, you know, these types of things. So yeah, I love what I do. And I feel that we're doing good as well, because, you know, we're identifying people that maybe have never gone to a sleep lab because they just don't like the idea of having to sleep in a hospital bed, you know, whereas this is done in the comfort of their own bed with their blankie and their teddy bear.
Yeah. I think that's a big misconception too. Just because you're in shape, like, doesn't mean you can't suffer from sleep apnea as well.
No, again, elite athletes I've worked with, without naming names, they've been apneic as well. And yeah, you know, it's one of those things where the neck circumference can be like where you carry your weight specifically. I work out 3 or 4 times a week to maintain this completely average looking shell that I walk around in. You know, I do my weights, and I've started playing pickleball for some cardio. But we run a pediatric program, like that. We have kids that are coming in that have sleep apnea as well. So, you know, if you find that no matter how many hours of sleep you get, you know, 7, 8, 9 hours, you're constantly walking around, you're just not feeling like you're getting restorative sleep. At the end of the day, a sleep test can shed a tremendous amount of light on what potential may be lurking under the covers, so to speak. Yeah.
Very interesting. So talk about insomnia. Like, I feel like the term that's being thrown around a little too loosely. Talk about more about what insomnia is.
So by definition, it's the inability to fall asleep and or stay asleep. A lot of people think that it's just people can't fall asleep at night, and some people have no problem falling asleep, but they wake up in a couple hours later and now they can't go back. But there's different types of insomnia as well, and we don't have a lot of time to talk about all of them, but the two main ones we can touch on here are maybe transient insomnia and then chronic. Transient is typically, you know, due to an external stressor. It's very episodic. It could be just for maybe a couple of weeks. Maybe it's due to a job loss. You know, maybe it's, you know, you're going through a life event. Maybe there's a loved one who's going through a cancer treatment. It could be a variety of different external stressors.
So you can't be born with
it? Transient insomnia, you're not really born with it. It's usually due to an external factor. Now, chronic insomnia is the one we're going to shift to next. And you're not born with it, but it tends to develop in your teenage years.
Okay.
And it's typically something that's a lifelong condition. And it's something that usually you'd have to go for what they call cognitive behavioral therapy, CBTI, and have a high touch point to try to get over this. So the transient, again, maybe just a couple of weeks in duration, and due to external factors that are going on, whereas your chronic insomnia is more of a lifelong condition that you're trying to have to manage. And usually that's due to having, or not due to, but the go-to there would be, you know, really strict sleep hygiene measures that are put in place, but then also cognitive behavioral therapy on a high touch point level where you're working with people on a regular basis to overcome that. Those would be your two main ones.
Okay. Talk a little bit about chronotypes.
Which one are you? Well, you tell me which one.
I don't know how to identify which chronotype I am.
Well, it's the notion where you've got like the early to rise, your morning larks, and then you've kind of got the mid range, and then you've got your night owls as well. So apparently, and a lot of the data would suggest that this is actually not a condition, but it's actually a genetic trait, or at birth kind of thing. It's almost predetermined by your genetics, your history. So the morning larks are the people that, they wake up, they spring out of bed, they're able to kind of be optimal as soon as their feet hit the floor. They're maybe a little bit even too much at the get-go, like, relax. But they do their best work in the morning hours, whereas the night owls are the ones that are working into all hours of the evening. And they feel, most at home in those particular spaces. They're most productive. Mm-hmm. They're getting the most amount of work done. My wife is like that to a certain extent as well. She's a professor at Algonquin. And I find it funny because I'll shut down my work day, 6:30, 7 o'clock. I pretty much knock out from like 7:30 a.m. till maybe a 6:30 or 7 p.m. And then I shut down at that point. Mm-hmm. But like I see her and she's almost ramping up at like 6 o'clock in the evening because she got to, let's say, as a teacher, there's always lots of marking to be done. And she's sitting down and going through all her marking and stuff. So yeah, there's no one chronotype that's better than another. Again, it's a kind of a pre-genetic disposition to that particular one. But so now that I've said that, where would you find yourself in that space? Or there's your neutral, which is kind of in between the two.
Yeah. I would probably say neutral. I like getting up earlier, just because it's quieter. There's less distractions. I feel like I'm able to focus a little more, but I wouldn't say necessarily like I am able to get up early, like very easily. I would say like at around like 8, 9, 10 o'clock is what like my biological internal clock is set to. But I would say I'm probably the most productive between like 10, 11, usually before my first meal.
Okay. Yeah. And that makes sense. I mean, one of the driving sleep hygiene practices to be able to wake yourself up to be optimal first thing in the morning, if that is your kind of chronotype and where the space you're operating in, is to expose yourself, expose yourself to as much daylight as you can first thing in the morning. Because that's going to balance your circadian rhythm that you talked about. And light enters the eye via the retina. And if you can get outside and expose yourself to as much natural light, as much daylight as you can first thing in the morning, it's going to allow your sleep-wake cycle to regulate. It causes all these ebbs and flows of different hormones. It suppresses melatonin. It starts adenosine, which is like a sleep pressure that builds up throughout the course of the daytime. So, if you're looking to be optimal, let's say you've got a 10 o'clock engagement or 11 o'clock engagement, maybe there's a test, just your body will wake up a lot faster and you'll be a lot more fired up, I guess, for lack of a better word, if you try to expose yourself to as much daylight as you can first thing in the morning. Okay. 20 minutes, 30 minutes of daylight right out the gate, no sunglasses, no hat, no nothing. Let that light soak in through your natural eyes. And again, it causes all these different systems in your body to activate. So
if I fall into that neutral chronotype, what time of the day should ideally I schedule my classes?
But I don't think do you have the ability to do that, or is it just kind of handed to you?
I mean, like we have a little bit of optionality and flexibility. Obviously there's some things we can't really control. But if I were to have full autonomy over when I should schedule my classes, what time?
I think the natural daytime hours are probably when most people are at their peak, right? Your circadian rhythm, again, is this sleep-wake cycle that's ingrained, and it's you can't really fight it. It's intrinsic, and it's something that everybody is kind of like, you can fight against it if you're doing shift work. And again, I did 13 years of overnights. I think the World Health Organization has now listed, people who work overnights, it's now listed as a known carcinogen. It's actually incredibly terrible for you. So, I would say keeping the daytime hours for your most productive hours, and keeping within that kind of time frame of that 9 to 5 world, which is when most of the free world kind of operates in. That seems to be the most productive for most people, if your circadian rhythm is kind of aligned and that sleep-wake cycle is balanced. As I mentioned to you before, one of the biggest things you can do to achieve that is anchoring your rise time. If you're getting up 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, and you're all over the place, it's going to make it very difficult for you to fall asleep that night, and then you kind of get desynchronized with your circadian rhythm.
Okay. Andrew, this has been really fascinating. I would say this last year or two, I've really been like hyper fixated on like productivity maxing.
Mhm.
And I'm definitely going to implement a lot of the stuff you said. So we have a closing tradition on this podcast inspired by Diary of a CEO, where the previous guest leaves a question for the next guest, not knowing who it is. So you have a question here from your friend, longtime friend, Dr. K.
Very good. It's in a sealed envelope here as well. It's like I'm reading a ballot. So he didn't know who was coming in next?
No.
What is your biggest fear in your professional life? I'll keep it light and comedic. I go on CTV News as our sleep subject matter expert, and I'm on the news at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock in the morning. And my biggest fear in my professional life for that is to crack a yawn while I'm on camera. If you're talking about sleep and you're on TV and it's live, I'd say, looking tired or looking exhausted or yawning while actually giving a sleep presentation or a sleep kind of segment, I think has been my biggest thing. But, I don't really have that's kind of like, again, like just a tongue-in-cheek type thing, but I don't really have a big fear in my professional career. I don't think. I
Why?
feel like, first of all, I love what I do, and I think that's important. I try to stack as many wins on top of each other in a day-to-day basis. I think, if you commit, find the passion first, and the success will come after it. I think you're going to be a lot happier if you love what you do. And I got into sleep again over 20 years ago. And I truly believe that if you're passionate about what you do, the success will follow it. So I don't really have any fear with regards to my professional life other than the joke that I made about yawning on camera. So that's probably it. And so I got to leave something for somebody else coming in here after we're done here.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Question. All right.
And so say you were to win the lottery tomorrow, would you change anything professionally?
No, I don't think so. I've talked about this, like our company potentially have an exit, and what would I do? Because I don't really look at my job as work. Like I wake up every morning and I enjoy the day-to-day activities that I do. And I think work gives you purpose. And I think everybody needs that. So if I won millions of dollars, I'd probably take more trips. I'd probably go explore, create horrible jet lag and jump around the world and globetrot a little bit. But I think I'd always do consulting. I do enjoy public speaking a lot, and I do that quite regularly. So maybe I'd get into the day-to-day grind and be a little bit more selective on the engagements that I had. But at the end of the day, as I said, I think if you love what you do, the success will follow. Not everybody's fortunate to do that, right? Some people are in jobs where like they just don't like it and they're clock watching constantly. And, my role at the hospital started to get that way after 20 years. I was finding myself becoming a little bit complacent.
Mm-hmm.
I just wasn't passionate. And what I do today, I'm very passionate about, and I hope maybe that comes through in the podcast. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, Andrew, this has been a pleasure. Thank you.
Sweet, man. Thank you. Cheers.